let me introduce my guest to you as we go into our discussion for today. And right here, right now in the studio, Bright Simmons. Bright Simmons is Honorary Vice President of Imani Ghana. And we have also Dr. Emmanuel Akwete. Dr. Emmanuel Akwete is the Executive Director of IDEC. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us this morning.
Thank you.
Right, so we will also have the EC represented by Dr. Trebo Kweku. And we will be looking at the issues that have come up as far as the voter registration exercise is concerned. And as you heard the EC in the course of the week, they have been congratulating themselves for having done a good job. Of course, it has been smooth in many, many places. And getting to the end of it, people got to realize that they didn't have to, as it were, mass up as they did from the start and put themselves in danger of COVID-19. In the course of this of the week, going to register myself, I realized that the registration center was completely empty and the people registering were just sitting there. They practically had no work to do, and so it was smooth. Now, let's listen to these comments on the back of the process, and then we'll start the discussion.
Question in French, like bonjour, and then when you answer them, then they think you are from Togo.
Who asked you bonjour?
The national security.
Oh, is that what they are doing?
Yes.
Are you sure?
Yes, when they came in the morning, that is what they did. They called them, viens. When they came, they said bonjour. Then they responded, bonjour. Then they said they are from Togo. Meanwhile, they teach French in Ghana. Me like this, I can speak French.
Sure.
But yes.
So how do you say how are you in French?
How are you? Comment ça va?
Ça va très bien, merci.
Ça va très bien. You see? And when you say it, then they think you are from Togo. Then they march you into the car and then they will take you away. Meanwhile, Akufo-Addo, our president, he was educated in France. He can speak French. Is he a Togolese or is a Francais? France. Some of them too, they have foreign this thing, like our politicians like this. They have foreign, some of them have foreign passport, ID card, but they don't do anything to them. But you, the civilian, when you have it, then they say, no, you are from Togo.
We have provided incontrovertible evidence of various incidents of violence targeted at people of Ewe or Volta extraction and people of Northern extraction all over the country. Beyond that, you as independent media entities have also had several reports that you yourselves have covered over all these incidents. Again, there is pictorial video evidence. It's so clear and glaring. So when you have a 70-plus-year-old man standing before the entire Ghanaian populace and in the face of such incontrovertible evidence, evidence of violence, evidence of beatings, evidence of arbitrary arrests, evidence of deliberate attempts to suppress votes in these areas, evidence of ethnic bigotry and discrimination. And he comes out to say these things are not happening and that somebody is engaged in what? Hate for votes. Then, you know, you just... It's so ridiculous and preposterous.
You heard the Defense Minister Dominic Nitiwo, who also said that some of these military officials are actually being impersonated, and he hasn't sent any military officials.
But is that not even more serious? Where have you heard in the history of Ghana that people can actually wear military uniforms? So it's a confirmation of some of our concerns, that people actually wear military uniforms, carry guns, and go out to polling stations and go and cause chaos and mayhem. And then there are 7 police officers, 7 military officers, and they are not able to do anything to them. Does this make sense? So he should be taking responsibility and telling us what is he doing about those impersonators and imposters.
It doesn't matter whether you are Sidin Ketia or you are Dominic Nitiwo or you are an ordinary man sitting in Doman Hinkro, you will be stopped because these were the orders of the Regional Security Council. The parties ought to respect the agreement that they themselves have signed. So the MPP, the NDC try to bus people, they will be stopped. If the NDC try to bus people, they will be stopped. If the CPP try to bus people, they will be stopped. If the PNC try to bus people, they will be stopped. All I urge the political parties to do is to respect what they have signed. Allow the people to go individually and register. And those people can only be challenged. But when you try to bus people, it is the duty of the security services, whether it is the military or the police, to stop you. Because that was the agreement from the Regional Security Council. That is for Banda and Hinkro. But generally, the former president is wrong. He's misled to think that the military is being used to suppress people. The voter region he cites, can anybody tell me that the figures in voter region are lower than the national average? Obviously no. So where is the voter suppression? Are the figures in the north lower than the national average? Obviously no. Are the figures in Greater Accra lower than the national average? Obviously no. So where is the voter suppression? Secondly, we have over 30,000 polling stations. How many polling stations have we seen soldiers visit for anybody to conclude that there's voter suppression? Of course, they have visited places where there's trouble, and that is their job, and they will continue to visit places where there's trouble. But for anybody to conclude, especially a former president and commander-in-chief of the Ghana Armed Forces, that there's voter suppression, I think he's misleading the people. So I am challenging him. I'm calling on the former president to provide us with evidence, and we will act. But as I see today, it's only mere allegation. He has not provided us with any evidence. As I said, if he's talking about Banda Hinkro, he should advise his people to start busing people. It is not allowed, and the military will continue to stop people who are busing people. Allow the people to go and register themselves. It's not your duty to bus people. Allow them to register, and everybody will be allowed to register. But you cannot bus people. They signed an agreement not to bus anybody. So the MPP, the political parties, I am telling them that if you attempt to bus people, we will stop you. Whether it is NDC, MPP, CPP, we will stop you, because it is only bringing a reaction from the opposite side. If the MPP try to bus people, the NDC will try to stop them. And we don't want that to happen. So the security will stop you before you bring trouble.
We've been hearing people are talking about the 2019 register. Had a total of 16,845,420 voters. 16,845,420 voters. Apart from this, we also had 797,493 people quarantined, who were quarantined. In other words, they were prohibited from voting. These people were on the duplicates and the exceptions list. The political parties are aware of this. This list was gathered from 2012. People who tried to register double, so they were prevented from voting. And these people make up almost 800,000. So when this is added to the registered voters of 2019, what it means is that overall the total registered will be 17.6, a little over 17.6 million Ghanaians. Had the Commission maintained the old register and conducted a limited registration exercise in all electoral areas and registration centers across the country, we would have estimated to conservatively, that's at the minimum, add about 2 million Ghanaians onto the existing register. And I know this is basic mathematics. 16.8 plus 2 million will give us what? 18.8. Is that not so? So what we are saying is that without the compilation of the new voters register, the Commission was on track to register some 90 million people plus another 800,000 people who remain on the multiple list. This would have given us a total number of almost 19.6 million persons. Approximately 20 million had we maintained the old register and done the limited registration, as compared to the current figure of 16.63 million. Some 3 million difference. With the compilation of this register, those on the duplicates exception list from 2012 have had the opportunity to also register. And still the commission is well within about 52%, 53% of Ghana's population. In conclusion, the commission's objective of ensuring a credible register is on track. With an estimated population of 31 million Ghanaians, many experts will agree that a voter population between 50% to 55% of the total population for a country in sub-Saharan Africa like Ghana is completely acceptable.
Right. So you heard Elvis Safria Ankra of the NDC in charge of elections in that interaction with Daniel Dazi. And before then you heard someone who also had a complaint about a confirmation of what the NDC has been saying is deliberate voter suppression targeted at certain ethnic groups. And then you heard Mr. Bosman, Dr. Bosman of the EC also telling us what they have done so far. Now, let's begin quickly. And if I have Dr. Srebor Kweku joining us, okay. Dr. Srebor Kweku, the Director of Electoral Services of the Electoral Commission, is the man billed to join us, joined by Simmons of the Executive, Honorary Executive of Imani Africa, and Dr. Emmanuel Akwete, Executive Director of the Institute for Democratic Governance, IDEC, to have this discussion. Once he joins us, we will ask him the questions that are necessary and have him also respond to some of the issues that our guests may raise. So let's begin quickly and see if we can deal with the aspects of the ugly side, so to speak, of what attended to the registration process. Dr. Akwete, what do you say about the NDC's charge? And I'm sure that we know that beyond the NDC making the allegations, there are independent organizations, media entities, including the state broadcaster, who also gave a broadcast of some of these acts of violence. But how the NDC puts it is whether the question whether it's proved or not proved.
It's a difficult question because I think we can only prove allegations when they are investigated. And in a situation where, as I heard the Minister of Defense saying they should give evidence, you know, I thought it's a two-way thing. Sometimes the person making the complaints would have evidence to give, but if there is no evidence, and since it is not an entirely isolated thing, we've had reports over time, I think the agencies of state must also be up and doing investigate. And they can then dismiss it and say, well, we didn't find the evidence, could you help us in this, and so on. So it's a two-way thing. But if we leave,
the NDC on the 4th of this month held a press conference and pointed to 6 regions where they led us to various communities, several dozens of them, various communities, and showed us picture evidence, ocular evidence of people being stopped, people who were in trucks being stopped by the military, including situations where they were confronted by the indigents or their community leaders, including a chief in Banda, for example, Banda Hinkro. So we have seen those videos. Some of them are showing right away.
Yes. I think maybe we should lift the conversation to a higher level. Registration is an administrative process. And ordinarily, people, the education that precedes it is so important to getting allaying fears and getting people to know that it's just you go, you walk in, you fill a form. It's not voting. Even your party identity would not be known because the form doesn't ask you that, you know. So the incidence of violence and the allegations and the reports and what was in was rather too high. And we were concerned from the start that we were doing this in a COVID context. Gathering people or people not knowing what to do or not having enough education and coming together and not following protocols and so on, who had all their risks, which we pointed out. It was one of the arguments why people felt, look, in the context of COVID, would you rather use what you have and take measures to ensure that at the end of it, it will still be considered to be credible? So in that case, to the extent that we had these incidents which were reported, some were beaten, MP beaten, we had gunshots, in some cases, the Kaswa areas and so on. And we know that teacher trainee was affected. You know, so we do not need this to happen across, in all regions, in all districts, or in all registration centers for us to see the gravity of it. Should a simple administrative exercise lead to this kind of violence?
So you just saw the footage,
yes.
One of them, and you saw the military.
Yes.
Together with the police.
Yes.
The NDC has issues. The military's job, they have not been assigned to be part of being at registration centers. But you see them at the registration centers.
I have an issue. I think that two things are important to having a credible process, a peaceful process, whether it's registration or elections. It depends on the EC's relations with the parties. Because look, without the parties, the EC would find it very difficult to do its job. And also the education that has to go for people to comport themselves. So you need to make decisions. Sometimes you would assert your authority to make a decision. But you must also pursue a path where you build consensus so you achieve collaboration. In this case, where they went into a situation where it was like the victor and the vanquished, you know, you are not getting the cooperation you need. There is some vigilance, there is some looking at faults that will be pointed out and so on. So we created that situation. Now, if you move forward further beyond that situation we created, then you see that the two parties would act a lot on perception, okay, and probably are not even talking to themselves. So the issue of the police coming in, was it law enforcement agencies coming? But it would have been part of their understanding that where law and order is breaking down, the police would come in, the army would come in. In this case, the minister, as I listened to him, was talking about busing. They went in to stop busing. I mean, that tells you that the process has some serious flaws. Because the incidence of busing, I remember in 2008, was one of the major things, especially when you're doing this clustering voting. The parties tend to bus, but that was not a biometric register. And therefore, the bloatedness of registers, if you look at, that's when it became more serious.
So I'm speaking to a bit of some of the specific, and I hope we can speak to those, so that you see the military participating in the exercise of security provision.
Yes.
The NDC has problems with that because I don't know what you know so far, whether the military were part of that. The information the state had given was that the military were to check the borders for
initially.
Yes, for one reason or the other.
Yes.
We had people like the voter regional minister, Archibald Lecha, leading, that's the NDC making the accusation, but you could see also a video where you see him clearly on the ground inspecting people's, trying to be what the NDC calls citizenship inspector, checking people in the queue, whether they were qualified to be registered. What do you say about those things?
You see, the military's presence in a simple administrative process and the violence that for me, is intimidating. And it puts to question the conflict that extends even to registration. And it's going to affect how people perceive the process to having been credible, to having been sufficiently guaranteed they walking in confidence and so on. The intimidation is clear. If you see soldiers coming with arms, and it shouldn't have happened in the first place. And although I listened to the reasons that were given, initially we were told they were going to undertake exercise, they'll be at the borders, and probably the borders are closed, it's against COVID-19, in furtherance of COVID-19 measures and so on. But I took what the minister said that there was busing, and the security, the regional security said you should stop, and now telling the parties whether you like or not. So the first thing it tells you is that the conflicts that were not resolved, there was no part today working together and see how they will ensure the credibility or integrity of even the registration process. So it gets in where you see the game being played out. Now, the army and police coming in intimidates. Okay, so I just cannot apportion who is telling the truth and who is telling the lie. The fact of the military presence at a police station wasn't warranted if the two parties had agreed to work together and the EC had worked, with them, that we must ensure, because it doesn't happen often. But if you're going to now get the police to search people's ID cards, are you Ghanaian, or as the gentleman said, do you speak French? And they ask you, and because you speak French, they can come to the conclusion that probably you are not Ghanaian. That is even a more serious violation. How do we handle that? It's a political process. It's not really the crime around if doing wrong at a polling station and so on. There are clear procedures, and they are harmless. I mean, those who were stopped because they couldn't register or challenge, they've tallied. They are going to go through a process of talking to some of them, about 30,000 or so. That is the nature of registration. It is administration. To the extent that we have this high incidence of military presence and police going in and talking to people, it's very intimidating. And I think it undermines the confidence people have in the process. So you get all the allegations coming, and ultimately it's going to affect the integrity, how people accept the quality of the register. They believe in it. The trust, mistrust issues are already there.
Okay.
And I think
so we'll get to that and ask whether, as the NDC suggests, this is true or it's possible that the numbers the EC has gotten so far may be because some people actually were prevented unlawfully, and there was suppression, as it were, and deliberate disenfranchisement of people. Therefore, it couldn't get the numbers that it should have gotten onto the register. Yes, Bright, what do you also make of the, violence and disagreements that have attended the registration? We have heard a very influential member of parliament sit on radio that reaches many, many people to confirm that if you were a dual national, the military had a right to stop you because you do not have a right to vote in Ghana. So if you were a dual national, maybe you were, part of you was in Togo and part of you was in Ghana, you couldn't vote. Clear miseducation. An MP who doesn't even know the law by himself.
No, I think on the issue of the involvement of the military, traditionally we have an integrated security. So if you look at the district security councils, you've had different types of security agencies involved in a coordinated effort. The problem though is that, and as Dr. Akwete pointed out, the security analysis that you do for a voter's registration does not suggest that you need the degree of heightened vigilance that requires the military to provide backing support to the police. So I was surprised to see the involvement of the military to that extent. If you expect that there are going to be armed people, if you expect for it, so to give you a very good example, we've had situations where because of armed robbery in the past, there were periods when the police used to provide some backup support to the military used to provide backup support to the police for roadblocks. Because in the past, they've had situations where armed robbers have been armed to the teeth, and therefore you needed to make sure that you are using all the resources that are available to you as security coordinators for public safety. But when you have a registration process, and we did see the military people enter the polling stations and seek to enforce the law, and seek to enforce the electoral laws, I think that was completely misplaced, because the police does have the proper jurisdiction when it comes to law enforcement. The Constitution is quite clear what the functions of the military are and what the functions of the police are. To have the military be the ones trying to enforce electoral laws simply creates the atmosphere that feeds into the general sense of distrust that was in the air ahead of the compilation of the register. The truth of the matter is that going into this, we had an electoral commission that was simply not willing to engage. the IPAC process, which has been one of the most important innovations in our electoral practice compared to other countries, was more or less decimated. Why? Because the biggest and most prominent opposition parties since our democracy began, the PNC and the NDC, were not fully on board.
How is that to blame for the violence that occurred in these places and the disagreement where military people are stopping people? And no, you hear the minister say clearly, and actually the armed forces issued a statement saying that in Banda there were issues. So the two major parties came to an agreement, and they decided that they will not bus people.
Yeah, but if there are issues that are security related, and people are being moved from a location to another location, because in rural areas you have some degree of dispersion of polling stations, there is absolutely no law that says that I cannot provide that kind of support for people that live a distance away to move into the polling station, when the truth of the matter is the rural areas are being discriminated against somewhat when it comes to the dispersion of these voter registration centers. Accra, one of the reasons why Accra experienced such amazing turnout for registration is because of the condensation of the registration centers. That has meant, therefore, that in Accra, you probably don't need to bus people because people have enough stations near to them. In rural areas, there are logistical facts on the ground. That means, therefore, that people will bus people because of the nature of the spatial arrangement that you have for voter registration. In those circumstances, if you think you suspect that the people that are being bused are ineligible, that's a police action. To use the military to stop civilians that are not armed, and where there is no security analysis to suggest that some people are preparing to undertake violent acts, is problematic.
Okay,
the reason why I brought
your point is that the EC has to take some blame because it could have increased the registration centers in these rural areas.
Not just that, and that is obviously a material resources matter. But my point is that the reason why there has been this heightened agitation, the reason why perhaps the government itself feels the need that the security situation in the country warrants the use of military power to enforce basic electoral laws, will be because they knew going into the process there was no trust on either side. IPAC has not been functioning properly. So a lot of the arrangements that were supposed to have been made and the rest of it were all one-sided. Later on, the NDC returned to some of the more final meetings. But there hasn't been a sense in which there's joint and collective ownership among the parties of the processes going forward. And I'm saying that, therefore, I'm not surprised if the national security somehow suspected that people will try and create havoc. And therefore, they had a security analysis which warranted the use of military power. You only use military power if you expect that there's going to be serious havoc that the police cannot contain. You get my point? What informs that security analysis going into the process? Only because you knew that there was deep distrust and a complete lack of collaboration going into this process.
Those of you who suggest that the law has clear provisions on how to challenge somebody you suspect is not a Ghanaian national, is that these are officers of the state. They must do a patriotic duty. And also we are told that some of the other people, the civilians who organize themselves to stop some of these people, were also doing a patriotic duty because they saw people moving from one to the next border. They interrogated people who couldn't speak Ghanaian languages, some Ghanaian languages.
No, I think some of these analyses are not well grounded in the simple fact that the law of residency applies till you register. If by the time that we are due to register, for some reason I'm itinerant, right? And so it turns out that I'm temporarily away, right? I'm resident here, but I'm temporarily away. I've been resident for the last 1 year, but I'm temporarily away because I'm an itinerant farmer and I've moved next door, and somebody is busing me in. That does not necessarily by itself provide grounding to suspect that the person is ineligible to register. You need proper intelligence estimates to make those determinations. And my argument is you can't simply use physical barriers to stop people because you think they are ineligible. It has to be informed by some degree of intelligence estimates. Nobody has arrested the members of parliament, the political figures that have been implicated in this, right? Nobody has said, look, we knew for fact because of intelligence estimates that they had gone in and brought people that were not resident in that location, or they've gone in and brought people that are not eligible to vote at all. If you're not going to prosecute these people, you're not going to investigate them, you can use physical measures to just stop people because you suspect they're ineligible. That's the point I'm trying to make. We did scouting. Luckily or unluckily, we focused mostly on the areas around Greater Accra region, a little bit in Ashanti. And so we didn't see any of these things. So I'm just making these points based purely on the evidence that has been adduced on this show and in the media. I wish that some of our scouts had seen some of these things for ourselves. Then we could make independent analysis about the situation.
It's too early to even come to the independent analysis because you need the data and you have to look at various factors. For me, I think what is important and we need to emphasize is that the EC is also responsible for convening the National Election Security Task Force. In fact, they work closely, okay, and it comes under the police chairmanship and authority. The army backs the police up when the police cannot, but you then would know that it is the police asking for reinforcement and so on. Throughout the registration period, we actually didn't hear about the National Election Security Task Force. I heard that some months ago, some regions, there was some National Election Security Task Force identified.
District level.
District level. But the national security, which then would monitor and the EC would even engage them and so on, was conspicuously absent.
So nothing, we don't know the intelligence estimates that are backing these decisions.
That is
That's
it.
the point.
You see, and there was a lot of mistrust. And you know that in our situation, usually, when you are in opposition, you mistrust the state institutions. It's impartiality, okay, and the professionalism, the autonomy they have to do things. So given the COVID-19 context where you're told that some soldiers have been moved to certain border areas, and already there were arguments and debates over the motive. And they said, no, we're just going to enforce border closure and so on. And now to see them then extending whatever the mandate is into busing and who should be stopped and so on and so forth. The pictures I saw, the first thing I wanted to know is where is the police? And how is this going on? Where is the national election? Could we be told something?
We have border patrol guards,
yes,
part of the customs units and the rest. And we keep using the military, knowing very well the history we have in this country of military rule.
It was intimidating. I think it's marred to some extent the integrity of the process. Integrity in terms of the trust people have.
Can we look at the tensions this has brought and the potential going into December 7, what can be done now? For example, the NDC suggested that in a press statement, of course, we heard the chief in Banda referring to some of the people who were being driven away and stopped, even being prevented in the queues from registering, that there's a relationship with these people who speak ever in the area dating back to 1919. And the NDC suggestion is that let me read this part of the statement. So we must also add that due to the relocation of settlements to make way for the Bui Reservoir, most of the Ewe people of Akanya Krom, especially those from communities such as Doko China, have found themselves on one side of the dam, whilst others remain upstream of the dam, and mostly go fishing, staying for several weeks and months before coming back on market days. The number of people who are currently staying upstream are close to 42,000, whilst those at the bonus side are about 20,000 people, if not more. These are all Ghanaians that are being disenfranchised on the basis of their tribe and nothing more. What can be done? Should the EC or the stakeholders pursue a process of seeking to give opportunity for the places where these allegations have happened, for people who are indeed Ghanaians to be given the opportunity to vote? Because as they say, some of them were actually holding their Ghana cards and yet were turned away because they were in a bus.
I think,
yes.
Okay, I think it's an important thing to consider. I know that the EC has set up a committee I don't know whether they are going to look at only the deduplication process. But I think that this issue, yes, that's their foremost task. But I think that this issue of identification that was questionable, okay, those who confronted them, and those who are maintaining, look, we are Ghanaians, and to then look at the ethnic or the language you spoke, I think really, really damaged our citizenship identity and claim. As citizens, that's what the common identity we should hold. We've gone too far into saying, well, you speak this language or you're living in this part of the country, so you can't even vote. I hear that there were areas where other people who spoke other languages, but in every region there are Ghanaians from different places. So our ethnicity playing that role, I think, has damaged. It's created a lot of problems, and there are pains. There are people, I saw some people who were complaining why they've been refused. They say, I'm a Ghanaian, but why, you know, these are emotional things that could stay for a long time. So the best way to go forward is for those people to be identified. I do not know if there was a system in place where their complaints were taken. The EC said, look, we've heard you, but we'll note this, we'll follow up.
At least the NDC has identified 6 regions
yes,
and various communities within those 6 regions.
Yes.
You are saying that it is possible
to investigate,
to give a special dispensation.
Yes, investigate, establish the veracity of it, and it's fair to come to a conclusion that yes, we will create a process for them. That's why I'm saying that I do not know how they are tackling the different processes. You cannot just close your eyes over it. You see, when you blow the trumpet of success for register, it is the integrity of the register. Okay. Do people believing that it's fair? It's going to, otherwise it's going to affect everything else you do. Okay. So this has to be tackled. Because if they are citizens and truly they are claiming, the state must have an entity. The EC itself must be interested in investigating or sending some agency to say, go and talk to them. And let it be done transparently, openly, and across wherever it occurs. Okay. Otherwise,
so,
it's a big problem.
We'll deal with the bigger issue of the question of whether the register was bloated or not.
That's what I'm waiting for.
Yeah. Do you think that there is opportunity or it is worth it?
Absolutely.
It is worth it, particularly because of what this has brought, the tension it has brought, and what you never know people may be contemplating ahead of in December 7, that to assuage and to give people opportunity so they don't get angry and do things untoward, the EC can give a special dispensation, investigate those particular areas, and allow some special room for those who have their IDs and those who can prove their citizenship to register to vote. That's a very interesting story. Once we don't have a contrary, claim to it, we can take it as what it is. There's a journalist, Star FM, Atewini Imbila Lawson.
Yes.
She said she went to the place to register, and somebody got up to challenge her, one of the agents. And the basis of the challenge is, you don't speak Ga, you don't speak Chi. So she asked the question to this agent, is Ga and Chi the only languages spoken in Ghana? She got challenged, but eventually, I think 2 days ago or yesterday, she went through the challenge process and she has her ID. You have no idea how some of these things would have fed into people's sentiments.
No, I think the EC has to embark on a wide-ranging reconciliation exercise, not just in respect of these matters. Going into this particular exercise, and for the last year and a half, this has been the most divisive electoral process I've seen in my 2 decades of observing Ghanaian politics. The Electoral Commission has been extraordinarily insensitive to the views, the attitudes, the concerns, etc. of a wide range of stakeholders. Whether it's medical doctors giving them advice, whether it's civil society institutions advising them, whether it's chiefs asking to be accounted to because they are the custodians of the native traditions that in most parts of rural Ghana is actually more predominant and effective than the formal civil state. This is not, we've never seen this before.
They have a responsibility. I mean, if things go wrong, they are the ones who hold accountable.
That is why it is in their interest, and definitely the interest of all of us and the peace and security of this country, that they immediately embark on a reconciliation exercise which require a reconciliatory tone and stop the triumphalism. A lot of their press releases, a lot of their press conferences is triumphalist in character. A lot of them are based on an attempt to taunt so-called opponents and perceived detractors. None of it makes any sense. You are a constitutional body. It is us that are mandated to criticize you to ensure you do the right thing. It is not up to you to start criticizing citizens and start to engage in exchange of words with citizens. They have to start embarking on a massive reconciliation exercises with the major opposition parties, with some sections of civil society that have been. This has been the most non-inclusive process we've seen towards our elections since we returned to democracy.
And what form should this reconciliation exercise take?
Let's be open and transparent to engage. Like this concerns around whether the register was bloated, was not bloated, etc. And then going forward, how do we keep some of the problems that they say bedeviled the old register, and where people have different views of what it was that bedeviled the old register? That process, we need a national dialogue, a proper, objective, rigorous debate about what happened, what was it with the register, and going forward, how do we prevent the same distrust and whatever it is from continue to fester? You need all voices, particularly those that have been most engaged in this debate, to be at the table discussing these matters in a truly objective manner, seeking to learn and understand and to improve. So the triumphalism should stop.
Once this period of registration is over,
yes,
there is a period when people can walk into the district offices and get registered.
Yes.
Would you not rather advise the parties that are claiming that they have the figures, the numbers about people who are potentially their members who have been disenfranchised, to rather, if they can, bus them to the district centers so that they register them?
They usually have to announce this continuous registration program.
Educate.
And educate. It's been erratic.
Show where they are.
Yes, last couple of cycles been a bit erratic in terms of how they've designed it and etc. So once they've done that and made it clear that you can still go in and register if you do not have problems, because they said they're going to do 2 extra days in their districts, I think today and tomorrow, whatever.
That's right.
And we will see how many people take advantage of that and whether the same problems will persist. You see, there will be no point having a continuous registration exercise if you're going to have gun-toting soldiers standing outside purporting to be making determinations about whether somebody is eligible or ineligible without due process. And so a soldier in what you call envy track standing astride the road, it's not due process. That's not how you if you suspect somebody is ineligible, you stop them from voting. If there's credible intelligence that somebody is embarked on wrongdoing, somehow they're scheming to get non-citizens on the register or non-residents onto the register in a particular location, you arrest those people, you investigate, and you prosecute. You don't send soldiers to physically stop people. That is not due process.
And it should have been the police.
It should have been the police as well.
So that
people trust that it's a normal civil process that is underway.
Exactly.
Especially when the soldiers are not trained.
Samson, you see, the real problem is that this whole process has elements, whether intended or unintended, that is disenfranchising. Okay? And there is an
Explain that. What are the elements?
You see, those who, for instance,
or unintended, that is disenfranchising.
Yes, I mean, if you said somebody should vouch, okay, and others couldn't go through the process, and they say, well, but I'm a citizen, I'm a Ghanaian, and so on and so forth, and because of that, they are not registered. Their name is not on the register. Okay. They cannot vote.
Oh, you certainly must get 2 people to vouch for you.
Yes, you certainly must.
That shouldn't be difficult.
But you see, there are also some challenges that occurred even in those processes. So in mopping up, I think there has to be some special dispensation, some arrangements made to ensure that nobody legitimately feels disenfranchised. They have the right to vote. It's their part of the birthright you have as a citizen. If we don't do that, we are going to get into a situation where the feeling that I've been disenfranchised itself would intensify the conflict that we already have, you know, and that is exclusion. You want everybody to be inclusive in this process. So I'm hoping that, and it's part of healing, the part of the reconciliation, that because every part of Ghana is somehow split between our 2 dominant parties, and so on. And I think that process is healthy.
Okay.
Their rights are respected, and the EC has administrative.
Let's talk about the figures the EC has posted.
Indeed.
And interrogate the questioning whether, in fact, the old register was bloated. You can tell the suggestion in the EC's communication in this regard,
which is very strange. I've never seen an organization so keen to discredit its own heritage. But let's start very clearly on this matter. When you say the register is bloated, you have to have some basis. And that basis has often been in about 3 dimensions. There's been an argument, one, that there are foreigners on the register in large numbers. There have been arguments that turnouts in some years have not corresponded to turnout that is expected, given the number of people on the register. And then thirdly, there have been arguments that when you look at the total population of the country, to have more than 50% of the population on the register is somewhat suspect. None of those make any sense whatsoever. And nobody has done any rigorous analysis that supports any of these 3 conclusions. There's no published peer-reviewed work. There's no published even normal white papers that attempts to justify these claims.
Afarijan is on record to have said the register is bloated on the basis of this phenomenon of parties busing people to register.
We'll come to that.
But it was also used in the UN.
Yes, we will come to that.
Yeah.
There is bloated as in deliberately machinated bloating, which is often what people suspect, that there are people that have a deliberate interest in keeping the register bloated to achieve a particular electoral purpose. Whether or not there are ineligible people on the register, it's not evidence of that type of bloating. And we'll do that distinction properly as I go on. When it comes to this issue of the national population compared to the total number of registered voters, there is enough comparative evidence worldwide to give you a good trend. And the factors that determine whether there will be a high proportion of voters in the population or electors in the population are very well understood. So I'll give you an example. In Greater Accra, you have almost 95% urbanization. That factor therefore means that because Ashanti region has less than 70% urbanization rate, though Ashanti has more people, Greater Accra has more voters and electors. Somehow, urbanization seems to correspond well to how many people vote. And I think a lot of that is due to the spatial organization of the vote, of the electoral registration process. We know that the political maturity and the level of competitiveness in the politics of that country also affect how many people in the country will be on the voters' roll. When we did our census in 1960, we had about 6.7 million people. Registered voters were about 2 million. That was in the range of what, 30%, right? In the subsequent election in 1969, the total population of voters compared to the total population as a whole was in the region of about 28%. Then we moved on to 1979. And by 1979, because of the increased political maturity and the competitiveness of those elections, because in 69, remember, the CPP had been proscribed. In 60, we're more or less on the way to a one-party state. So in 1979, when you have true competitive democracy emerge, we had hit around 48% and was rising. By the time we got to 1992, we were around 52%. From 2000 onwards, the 53 to 55% range has been pretty consistent except for 2004. What happened in 2004? The Electoral Commission decided to change the nature of identification to photo identification, which increases the processes required. They didn't have enough cameras, etc. And they did the registration process in a period of 2 weeks. For that reason, it was not surprising then that in 2004, we saw a significant decline from 2000, about a 5% or so decline. That has been the only time the trend has been backed. Since then, we've seen a consistent trend when it comes to how many people are on the voters' roll compared to how many people are in the population in general. People have often talked about Volta region, and a lot of the animosity has centered around whether or not there are foreigners on the voter roll itself. The truth of the matter is that since 2000 to date, we've had roughly 35% in increment from the voter numbers in 2000 to the voter numbers here. The voter numbers in 2000 were about 983,000. Today, if you combine OT and Volta, because the two regions were split, you are in the region of about 1.3 million, thereabout, 3-4 million, thereabout. Now, what that suggests, and then if you compare that to Ashanti region, where in 2000 they had less than 2 million people, and today they have almost 3 million people, and therefore there's been a 50% increase. The suggestion that somehow there's something suspicious going on in Volta is completely apocryphal and high fantasy. Complete high fantasy. There's no evidence whatsoever. There is something peculiar about the situation in the Volta region. Not evidence, not a single strand of evidence. The increase and the increment in the Volta region have been extremely consistent. And indeed, it mirrors much better the increase in the national tally compared. So we've moved from about 10 million people to about 17 million people, right?
Right.
That is in excess of, it's almost 70%, right, in that region, right? Volta has done about 35% of that. Now, if you compare that to Greater Accra, which has seen the most increases over time, the best explanatory variable for that trend is urbanization, is the degree to which spatial organization of registration centers help this, etc. None of these apocryphal, conspiratorial analysis about somebody sitting in Togo busing tens of thousands of people. Do you know the logistical feat involved in bringing enough people from Togo to register to a point where it can impact national elections? In a register where you have 17 million people, you will need to bring in about 100,000 people or thereabouts. Do you know the number of vehicles you need? Do you know the impact on border crossing? And what it will mean for normal flow of goods and services if all we had were people just being bussed, tens of thousands of buses, literally, over a certain period. So none of this makes any sense whatsoever. And if there is anything that is great about this particular campaign that we are on, it's the fact that, for once, we are going to demolish this theory of Togolese contamination and this theory that somehow the electoral register is the product of some conspiracy among who we don't know permanently. The evidence now is conclusive, and I'll go into it if you give me the chance in your next cycle. Conclusive.
By the over 16 million that it has registered so far, it finds a certain consistency in the registration process, or the data as compared to the old register, except that it clearly suggests that if it had not done this, but done what you and other, the double dozen of civil society organizations were suggesting, would have ended up with a register whose population compared to the national population of 31 million would not have been consistent. It says Greater Accra,
no, I heard him.
Greater Accra, Ashanti region, the eastern and central regions maintained their previous percentages, so to speak. It was only the remaining regions that had some, if you like, marginal increase.
Greater Accra has increased. But point is very simple. I listened carefully to the Electoral Commission's statement in regards to this matter. And I think that, with all due respect to the very eminent professionals that work there, a lot of the analysis was statistically offensive. One, the only reason they managed to hit or exceed their target was because the things that they told us they would do in the registration center, for which region some of us said they could not register more than 12 million people, those things were not done. And we have videos that if you show on the screen will show that. In a lot of, until about 21 days into the process, a lot of the stations that we visited, we saw overcrowding by design. The system was designed such that they would be overcrowded because they were so keen on being able to register as many people as possible in order not to be accused of having bungled the process. That the process that the one
I thought from the start they made us understand that this thing was clustered and that each would have their turn.
Well, they said they were going to keep one.
So if we had actually followed that,
no, that's not
we didn't need to mass up from the start.
That's not the point. Regardless of whether people mass up or not, you give certain principles you're going to abide by. You're going to separate people by 1 meter. You're going to sanitize the tent once every time somebody comes on. We went there, we took videos. In fact, we have videos of other practices which we will disclose this weekend.
But those could not be deliberate, as you suggest.
What I'm saying is that they did not go there intending to do those things. Because when we went there was nobody standing there saying, 1 meter. There were no signs on the ground that said you stand here. So there was no plan whatsoever in those stations, in Kwashiman, in Santa Maria, in Koliklote. We sent scouts all over. We have videos that we're going to continue to release. Secondly, we saw evidence also, and I think Kodio has confirmed some of this, that guarantor contractors were being tolerated widely. They were practicing in the open. And there was nothing the EC was doing to stop them. And that meant, therefore, that the EC was extremely invested in the process being very fast, even if it meant breach of the law. So you had a lot of forms that were already pre-guaranteed, that were there, and when you go, they give you one of them, and you just fill something quickly and you move away. There was no effort whatsoever to make the guarantee process anything close to being of high integrity. Everywhere that we went, the guarantee process was extremely shambolic. In many cases, already done, the people don't know them, they are standing in the station and doing it. So my argument is, if they had followed all the things that they said they were going to follow, one, they could not have hit that 17 million, which would have been a disaster for this country. The alternate disaster is that because they did not follow these things, the likelihood that people are going to get more infected is high. We are lucky that in this country, for some reason, severity and deaths are low. Thank God. But this is not due to the EC. This is just blind, dumb luck. So that is the first point. But the more critical point is this. The EC then had, I couldn't believe it when I heard them say that they had an exemption list. And this exemption list, which is also the multiples and the duplicate list, has over 700,000 people. And then somehow, if they had not done what they just did and had opened it up, all those people will come from somewhere and come on the register, which makes no sense. The exemption lists are a subset of your existing main list of people that you believe are disqualified in one way or the other. So whatever the dynamics are, it's not an extra set of names. You get my point? It's not an extra set of names that somehow will have materialized out of thin air. The 16.8 million we had going into this process, that 16.8 million, a subset of it is on that exemption multiples and duplicate list. So there's no dynamic, it has no contribution whatsoever in this analysis. The real point is, if you have done limited registration and you follow the consistent trend since 2000 in terms of limited registrations, the only time that we backed that trend was ahead of 2008. And that was because in 2004, we had a particular problem where we introduced these digital pictures and used only 2 weeks. So there were a lot of people that were not on the register then. So when they had the chance to register in 2008, we had a sudden surge of 1.8 million people. Everything before then and after then has been very consistent. From about 632,000 people registered, limited registration, in 2006, to 1.1 million in 2016, to 1.2 million last year. Nothing suggests that if you have done limited registration, you get 2 million. It's actually statistically offensive because we have the evidence that shows the
EC
trend.
that is doing this job, and that was its projection that if he had done the limited
which of these projections has ever been true?
he would have gotten 2 million.
Which projections have been true? Ahead of this election, they said they would do 13 million people. Then as they saw the enthusiasm build up, they revised to 15 million. And now we know they are 17 million. The 16.6 million that they are banding around is because they are counting for 35 days, not 36 days. And the reason they are doing 35 days or 36 days is because they don't want to give some of us in their mind, they think that some of us will take credit if they acknowledge that they fit 17 million. So the argument is very clear. If they have done limited registration, the best statistical analysis we have from 2000 suggests they will not have registered more than 1 million people. That would have taken us close to 18 million. Then you need to account from 2012 onwards what we call the age-adjusted death rate effect on the register. Why? What does that mean? People that are 18 years and above that have died, a certain proportion will be on the register. If you analyze that set, you get about 1.2 million people that have died since 2012. The good thing is that our mortality rate has been dropping from about something in the region of 10 people when we started this, this particular trend of analysis that I'm discussing, to in the region of 6.8, that's 0.68% of people die every year in this country, compared to 1% earlier on, and about 0.8% in 2012. That means, therefore, that the number of dead people on the register is actually reducing in terms of overall proportion. But you still have to account for it. And if you account for it, you get about 1.2 million. Now, if you are then subtracted the 1.2 million from the 18 million, which will have resulted if they have gone ahead and done only limited registration, you get 16.8 million, leaving people on the register. What is the effect of this analysis? The effect of this analysis is that this expense, this nearly $150 million expense, accounting for the actual cost of the registration, nearly 40,000 people or so, whatever, the machines that they bought, which is in excess of $60 million if you add software and the rest, the data center, plus the $60 million in salvageable value in the existing equipment that we've thrown away. If you add all of that together, you are hitting $150 million in a country where people sleep on the street. All of that effort was purely to remove a few dead people and a few minors from the register. The problem though is that they could not have removed the minors because they do not accept the use of birth certificate.
Yeah.
Dr.
Akwete, don't you find that, you know, there's some amount of rationalization in the presentation that may not be consistent with the earlier projection by civil society as led on this very platform by Bright Simmons, that it was mathematically impossible for the EC to be able to register 12 million in 40 days.
Now we said 12 million is what they could if they follow the rules they laid out, and they didn't follow the rules. So that is the
you know, I think that what is important is we've gone through a process, and we tend to be worked up by the number of registered voters, the total, and so on. When you look at the trend, the elections, on elections day, what happens? It tells you clearly that it's average around close to 11 million, 2012, 2016. So you may have 15, we had 14 in 2012, 14.2, I would say, then it became 15.7, but on election day, less, voted. And that for me is more important, because if we see bloatedness as meaning that every single person on the register is going to vote that day, and that's where you see foreigners and others influence the election, then that's fine, but it doesn't happen that way. Now, how do we explain the difference?
I have a theory on that as well.
Dr. Farijan once explained that at some point, the voter's card was the most credible ID people wanted. But they were also not durable. I mean, for whatever transactions, they got spoiled and people always needed more. So when we didn't have the biometric system, the multiple registration, one of the purposes was people wanted more cards that they could use to transact their business, because the system, they were demanding ID cards. But when the biometric came in, you see, the focus of biometric system that they procured in 2012 was more to detect multiple registration and stop people from doing that. Because if you multiple registered, you also voted. You could go to places under the manual. And this became very effective, that you couldn't. So multiple voting opportunities were really reduced to the barest minimum. And it's continued with that. So as far as we are concerned, in a biometric registration system, if only because we're using, our handprints are very unique, and the system is such that you'll be found out one way or the other, and so on. The impact of the bloatedness, on the outcome is itself dealt with in a way.
But also the point is this.
Yes.
The turnout analysis often is not backed by real statistical analysis, and this is the reason why. When we've had low turnouts, and it's really 2000 and 2008, and then we had this recent one in 2016 that people say was also low because it's below 70%. In all of those instances, the one thing that was consistent is that we changed governments. Every time we've changed governments, turnout drops. The reason is perhaps because of the fact that in this country, incumbent governments lose elections based on whether or not their base is
strongholds are
activated, animated or not. That will entirely explain. That's the most effective explanatory variable for turnout in this country.
Now,
nothing to do with bloat.
Dr. Akwete, so, I mean, bottom line, if you look at the data as the EC has given us, if you compare that with the statistical services, data about, Ghanaians who are supposed to be at least 16 years, numbering
16,
about 18 years of about 17 million, 17 million plus.
Yes.
And the projection that doing 53% of the voter population for register is best science.
No, that's not
then the NDC's claim of suppression will not be backed. And also the NPP's claim, which the
bloatedness.
of bloatedness will also not be backed.
I think they work out nicely. You see, a number of conditions that would have taken us out of this situation were never met. We've already known since 2012 and in 2016 that we do not clean up our registers. The dead, we don't. I mean, the greatest success of this exercise for me is that you've cleaned up the dead. You know, except those who register.
It's a very expensive way to clean up the dead.
It's a very expensive way, but that is the only thing. But in terms of people underage who get onto the register, it's exploded.
Well,
what has happened now?
The death certificate, which is the only way you can do that determination.
I'm just looking at what happened, and the fact that if you're a minor, you're bussed, and it happened in 2008, a bit into, I'm not sure about 2016, because usually the busing becomes effective when you are topping up. You know, you're just looking at not an entire general registration. You're looking at people who have come of age, and therefore they must go into the system and so on, like in 2008. But in this case, busing became the biggest issue. And that undermines what you have. So the numbers have gone up, but the one problem that we thought, the minors thing, where the two parties generally would mobilize people, buzz them and so on, became what has defined this registration.
But Doc, you have a situation where the two main sources of legitimate bloating, so I'm distinguishing between legitimate bloating and the types of conspiratorial bloating that they often talk about, is so-called minors and so-called dead people, right?
Yes.
Now, the only institution in this country equipped to prevent minors and dead people, and equipped to prevent minors and dead people from being on the register is the birth and death registry.
Yes.
They issue two documents, the birth certificate and the death certificate.
Yes.
Both of them are contingent on one, because if they don't have a record of you, they can also tell you that you're dead. Now, if you then say that that document is not allowed, on what basis are you going to remove minors? What is the, how are you going to tell that somebody is below a certain age or above a certain age if the only institution empowered and equipped to do this is being delegitimized by its documents being routinely removed?
You see, but that is why I'm making the point that the high incidence of busing itself then undermines the integrity. The problem, part of the problem we're trying to solve by saying let's have a whole new exercise because it's bloated and so on. The minors contribute to that, but we are not able to, we failed to do that because that became the dominant thing.
Invest in a birth and death registry,
so
we go and spend $150 million on
exactly. So you did it, and then the most important thing, look, multiple ID cards. So in 2015, for instance, you remember there was this workshop the EC organized at Alisa to look at whether we needed a new biometric register or not. And some of the reasons we put forward is that there are certain structural things biometric cannot solve. Part of it is identifying a minor or a foreigner, and then who is dead and who is not in the person. So what we thought should be done is that if we had used only the national identifications card, which everybody must have, but we didn't, we were not ready to really compile a new voters register with a higher integrity than we have had previously.
Because
we were not ready.
To do that is to invest, 20% of the $150 million you just blown on this, 20%, building a system where in the birth and death registry, they extend coverage from the 60% or so nationally to almost 100%. How do we know we can do this? In the northern region, they have about 85% coverage birth certificate. In the voter region, they have just about 50%. So we already have national inequities, which additional investment can clear. Secondly, when it comes to death certificates, if you were to put $5 million in the birth and death registry tomorrow, and they were to go and register the mortuaries, add the cemeteries, and invest in the municipal systems for death registration and the likes of it, connect to the hospitals, you have an API from the birth and death registry to the EC. That will flag every minor and will flag every dead person.
An equivalent amount would have helped the national identification.
20% of that amount. Instead, you blow $150 million and get back to exactly where you were, with no room going forward to prevent the things that you said were important.
So this cannot be the final, the last time we're compiling.
Very, very final comment here. And as far as the EC is concerned, we now have a register that, after the deduplication process, we can say is credible enough. We will not do a fresh start again.
I don't get where they get that assurance from. And also there was voter suppression.
No, but you just said we've spent 100 plus
50.
Achieving nothing. Achieving absolutely nothing.
So we should not be doing that again.
No, you see, we have to do that again because, look, we haven't done the census. There are lots of speculations on what the population size is, and then the
so you do limited registration, and then you top it up.
Well,
we will not have to do a new register again.
I'm not sure we would not have to. You see, it's a political thing. When in this case where there was no, you need a consensus.
No, are you saying that the dead people are going now to be automatically removed, or the minors are somehow...
It's not going to be possible.
It's going to continue because they did not invest in the fundamentals to fix the fundamentals.
Yes, so you need to deal with the fundamentals, and then you know that everybody has this card. There's a birth and death registry, well connected into databases, and that tells you automatically you need a certain level of investment.
You don't give $60 million to a French conglomerate and then buy whole new equipment when you bought 2,000 of them in 2018, and then purport therefore that you've done well. Also, there was voter suppression. Let me tell you why there was voter suppression. Every year, of the returnees that come to this country, or the foreigners that come to the so-called visitors that come to this country, about 400,000 of them are actually Ghanaians that are returning back. A lot of those people tend to register. In fact, a lot of the ROPA sentiment has been because of those people. Due to COVID, that 300,000 or whatever is missing on the register. Those people, if they were to come back sometime in December to vote like they used to do, will not be able to vote. So this notion that there's been no voter suppression
and the census will take place hopefully next year.
All right. Thank you guys, the two of you, very much for joining us and sharing your views on the registration exercise. If you are sending us a message or tweeting on the subject, remember to add #Newsfile, and we'll take a break and return to read the messages to you. My guests have been Bright Simmons, Honorary Vice President of Imani Africa, and Dr. Emmanuel Akwete, who is the Executive Director of IDEC, Institute for Democratic Governance. We were billed to have Dr. Srebo Kwaku in charge of electoral services of the Electoral Commission, but he's not been able to join us. We do not have any reasons for that. We'll take a break and return shortly.
Okay.